So tell us what you wanted to be when you grew up.
I actually don't have any idea. Many people have these fond memories of their childhood and what their parents did to them and what they did to their parents. Life sort of started for me about the 8th grade when I was 13, and I discovered basketball. That was the greatest discovery of my life. Everything up till then had sort of been sherbet, and finally the ice cream was served. So I concentrated on playing basketball. When did I do that? In the morning, in the afternoon, at night, while I was sleeping, while I was walking, while I was in class. But it became the fervor of my life. What I found is that it eliminated a lot of the other problems that I might have thought about at the time. For example, when I was 15, I was a sophomore in high school. I was diagnosed with diabetes. What was the difficulty? There wasn't any difficulty. The faster I could get out of the doctor's office and back onto the basketball court, the better I liked it. And how did I handle the diabetes? Well, that's very interesting. This was 1948, and I had a great doctor. I had the original diabetic doctor, Dr. Elliot Joslin, who ran the Joslin Clinic in Boston. And he had a diagnosis for diabetes. What do? You take insulin every day, you exercise every day, and you watch your diet. It's an amazing cure for humanity. And I think if people would pay heed to that today, their lives would be a lot better. But in any case, basketball carried me through high school, and many of the difficulties that would otherwise have been submitted to the disciplinary activity of the Jesuits.
You were not a obedient student?
I was a good student. That is, I could get by, and I actually survived on the first 6 grades right through high school, but it got steadily worse. But no, I was not an obedient student, and I would say I was sort of a troublemaker in high school, but a wonderful troublemaker. The Jesuits used to come to all the basketball games and cheer me on, so you couldn't do better than that.
But you ended up in college, so something must have clicked in high school to
Oh, well,
send
there
you
was no question about going to college. My father quit school in the 8th grade. My mother went to high school, which was then equivalent to a college education, but she worked at the Boston Globe, and her intent was to get all her 4 kids through college. And amazingly enough, there were 2 girls, and the oldest girl, my sister Marie, went to Emmanuel College and then went to Rome to work in the U.S. Embassy in Rome, met her husband over there. But she's highly educated, has a doctorate in classics, and is a really spectacular writer. And my younger sister decided after her sophomore year in high school that she would go to junior college, but that was the most she would admit to doing any advanced work. Very intelligent woman. And then my brother followed me along 10 years later, went to Boston College High School, where I went to Boston College, where I went. Then he went to law school, and now he owns his own law firm in Boston, Sally and Fitch. Please patronize. Yeah.
So what high school? You went to Boston College
I went
High
to
School?
Boston College High School, and actually, it's very interesting because my 8th-grade teacher, who was probably the one who started me on mathematics, if you have to try to trace it, because one day she kicked me out of class for smart-mouthing her, and came flying out into the corridor and beat the living hell out of me. And she was about 5'8", and I was about 6'3", but I was scared of her. Oh, brother, Sister Mary Stella. So she sat me down in the last seat in the last row and gave me a book of math problems, said, do these. And that's what I did all year. I did math problems, page after page after page. And I loved every minute of it. And then in the spring, there's an examination to win a scholarship to Boston College High School. It's a big deal in the Boston Catholic Archdiocese. And a parish is always proud if some student of theirs wins a scholarship to BC High. So Sister Mary Stella called me at 7:30 one morning, Monday morning it was, and I had taken the exam on Saturday, and she said, you won, she said. And those guys are good. And but she was the one that absolutely got me started, no question, doing these problems. And that got me a scholarship to BC High, half scholarship, where I tried to study as little as possible and play as much basketball as possible, but I still survived. I was clearly going to college. And then I got a athletic, well, they deny it, but I was offered an athletic scholarship to Columbia, room, board, tuition, books, $20 a week for a job on the side. This was 1950, and sounded pretty good to me, except I came home and my mother said, you're not going to that commie school. So I decided I wasn't going to that commie school. So then I took the exam at Boston College for a scholarship, and I won a half scholarship to Boston College, an academic scholarship. So where else would a low-class Boston Irishman go but Boston College up the hill? It's really, really funny when I look at it nowadays. It's a highly competitive school, and it's very tough to get into. And every low-class Boston Irishman got into BC. That was the order of the day. So anyway, I went up there, but again, the main feature of my life was basketball. And I had a great time. I played freshman ball. I even made the varsity, but picked up mostly splinters sitting on the bench. I got interested in mathematics about my senior year. I had a guy named Hans Hafley, who was a postdoc at both MIT and Harvard. He was working with Ted Martin, who was then the chair at MIT, and he was working with Al Fors at Harvard. And he was coming over to BC to make a living, and he ran a seminar out of Ray Wilder's old book on Foundations of Mathematics, and by golly, I found that about 1/10 as interesting as basketball, which was a spectacular achievement for mathematics at that time. So I really took to it and decided I was going to go to grad school because, hell, I can beat basketball, I can beat math. I found out it was a little tougher task than that, but anyway, after I finished BC, I took a job in the intramural office for two reasons. One, because I had to take some graduate classes in their master's program, and two, because I could be in the gym all day. And so it had a dual effect. It was wonderful. I played basketball most of the day, went to graduate classes in the afternoon, and was having the time of my life, thinking now I was there. So in any case, what happened then was that I took 2 years of master's study at BC, and I taught the first year out when I was an intramural assistant. I also was a sub-teacher in Dedham. I taught junior high and high school, and I loved every minute of it.
What year would that be?
1954-55. I taught both junior high and high school in Dedham as a sub-teacher, and then I took a full-time high school job in 1955-56. And I have to say that basketball to the side, I then found the love of my life, which was teaching. There wasn't any question in my mind that I belonged in teaching. It might have been an aspect of my desire to be a drill instructor in the Marines or something like that, but in any case, I took to it like a fish to water. And that was my first year of teaching in 1954-55, and I've loved every minute of it since, and I'm teaching again right now. And however old I am now, I'll be teaching for 10, 12 more years. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. So I loved that. I loved the teaching in high school. And then the next year, I got a consulting job in Carlisle, Massachusetts, and worked at Lincoln Labs. And I taught part-time at Regis College, which was quite interesting, I must say. Anybody who knows about Regis College. My buddy Jack Riley and I decided to apply for graduate school. We would sit around. He came to Boston College to do a master's program, and we would sit around all day long and look at courses that other universities gave, and we would check off all the courses we were going to take when we got there. And Jack and I, he was a lively friend and a good buddy, and we both had, I guess, an interest in mathematics. He had fire in the belly. I didn't have it quite yet, but if you're going to do mathematics, at some point you got to get fire in the belly. So anyway, Jack and I, we applied to a bunch of places. I applied to MIT, Harvard, and Brandeis. And my buddy Hans Hafley, who had run this senior seminar that so brought to the forward my interest in mathematics, he managed to talk to Ted Martin, and they let me into MIT, and he managed to talk to Alfors, and they let me into Harvard. And they both talked to me and said, "We understand you're a lazy bum, and if you don't, we'll let you in here. We won't give you any money, but you can come and try us out, and if you do okay, we might give you money your second year." They already heard that I had a reputation as a teacher, and you got to understand, university math departments love to have good young teachers so that the old guys don't have to teach. I mean, a very important principle that which we may experience here on occasion.
Indeed.
Indeed, yes. Then along came Brandeis. 1957 was their first year, and they had 4 hotshots, real hotshots. Oscar Goldman was the chair, and Leon Ehrenpreis, and Arnold Shapiro, and Maurice Auslander. These were 4 of the brightest young mathematicians in the country, and it was their intention to establish our whiz-bang math program. Well, there we opened in the fall of 1957, and sitting on the front steps of Calman Hall were Jack Riley, my buddy from BC, who was pretty good. Jack was pretty good. And Paul Sally, who was suspect at best, and a Chinese woman named Louise Ho, who she was very attractive, but she couldn't do math. So we were their first class, and an interesting class to say the least. I still remember Goldman. They didn't know who we were, what we knew, and they decided that the best way to find out was to invite us over to a party, graduate student faculty party. So we had a party at Oscar Goldman's house, and all of the faculty were there, and 3 thriving graduate students. And we got about 10, 15 minutes into the evening, drank a beer or 2, and chatted a little bit, and Goldman looked at me and said, "How many groups of order 16 are there?" And I said, "Huh?" Well, needless to say, you've heard this before. I mean, the conversation continued, and they beat the living crap out of us. They just had us at every math. Jack Riley was good. Thank God for Jack. Jack was not only knew something, but he could talk like a good Irishman could, fast and blarney, but some truth scattered in it. Poor Louise just sat there dumbfounded, and I kept there trying to turn the conversation to basketball and not succeeding. So at the end of the evening, it was very interesting because we just felt terrible, the 3 of us. Obviously, we had failed, but if you think we felt terrible, you should have seen how they felt. This was their first graduate class at Brandeis, and it was the worst thing they had ever seen in their lives. But nonetheless, we went on. It was interesting. Goldman called me into his office the next day and gave me the same speech that Martin and Alfors had given me. "Sally, we know you're a good teacher. You might be bright, but nobody knows that yet, and you're a screw-off. So if you don't shape up in 2 months, we're going to kick your ass out onto South Street." That was the street that ran by the front of Brandeis. So I said, "Yes, sir." So I worked hard. and as a matter of fact, starting to learn mathematics in a serious way for the first time in my life, and it was all pretty good, and I was making progress, although Hugo can tell you the story of my, that has gone about my first orals. They were, to say the least, an abject failure. But nonetheless, at the time, I was the best teacher in the math department. So they were in sort of a conundrum. Aaron Price likes to tell the story about, I was trying to work with Leon Aaron Price, but he had a few foibles of his own, and left after 2 years to go to yeshiva. Then I tried to work with Joe Cohn, and I was not Joe's highest blessing at that stage. I wanted to be in analysis, I thought, but that was probably because I had never thought about anything else. So Joe took me on, and didn't work too well. And Joe was going to the Institute, I forget what year, about 1960, 61. And however, I must reveal one incident. Oscar Goldman, I mentioned him previously as the first chair of the Brandeis Mathematics Department. He was giving just a spectacular course in algebraic number theory, really beautiful. This was probably in 1958, 59. And we were talking about it one day in the corridor of the math department, and he said, well, what do you think of this course? I said, this is just absolutely beautiful. I said, I'd like to learn it so I can teach it someday. Uh-oh, wrong thing. Oscar Goldman, you'd like to learn it, son, because you'd like to do some research in it. I said, no, that wasn't exactly what I had in mind. I said, I would really like to learn it so I can teach it well and then do something. Bad. We didn't speak again, so to speak. I then went to teach at Boston College. I should tell a story about my wife, because the second year of the math program, a woman came from Barnard named Judith Donovan, another Irish Catholic, I might say, coming to Brandeis to diversify their basic societal education, I guess. But she came to work with Maurice Auslander, and Ellis Colchin at Barnard and Columbia had urged her to come to Brandeis, and she did. And she immediately became the best graduate student by far in the department. But here she was, a beautiful Irish lass, let me tell you. So Sally turned his attention from basketball and math immediately to Judith Donovan. About halfway through her first year, I guess January of that year, we decided we would get married. And that was, I guess some good things happened at Brandeis, but that was by far the best thing that happened to me at Brandeis. And she, incidentally, turned out to be a stellar mathematician. She got a master's degree at Brandeis, and we had 3 kids right away, Irish triplets they're called, one every 18 months for 3 years. And but always the intent was that she would go back to school and get her PhD. And so Auslander, who was close to Irving Kaplansky, who was then the chair of the math department at Chicago, urged him to recruit her. So we came here, we were married for 3 years. I went to teach at Boston College just to keep food in Judy's mouth and my mouth and that of our increasingly large tribe of kids. So then, too, I bumped into my real thesis advisor, whom Hugo knows very well, Ray Kunze. Ray took sympathy on me immediately because Ray had 5 kids. So apart from things that draw people together, it's having a large number of kids and experiencing how it feels to raise a large number of kids. Now, Ray, I think he had had most of his by then, and I was just starting to have mine, but he understood that I was going to have several before the process stopped. So I asked him if he would help me do some classical analysis, and because that's what I was really interested in. And he said, sure, I'll help you any way I can. Eli Stein, who will enter the picture in just a moment. Eli had been a graduate student at Chicago and was then at MIT as a Moore instructor. Eli is now at Princeton, of course, very famous analyst. And they were collaborating together, Eli and Ray said he would help me, and he would, when Eli came to campus, that Eli would also help me, and they would try to get me along the path to a thesis. They were working on something that at the time I pronounced semi-simple Lie groups. Now, it turns out there's a Swedish mathematician whose name is Sophus Lie, who you'll see a picture of him up on the bulletin board over there. But at the time, I didn't know a Lie group from a banana. But here is the way it worked, is that this was the early 60s. I had had one kid and a second on the way, and Ray was helping me, and Eli came to campus, and they took me aside and talked to me, and then Eli agreed to talk to me about some classical analysis, and I don't have the notes anymore, but in about an hour and a half, I filled 50 pages with notes. Eli talks a blue streak, knows everything, and will tell you everything. And so that was a great conversation. I went home that night, looked at my wife and said, oh my God. And the next day, Eli and Ray called me in, and I don't know whether this will make the film snippet or not, but I have to tell it anyway. They said, Sally, you're doing okay. You're bright enough. Actually, believe it or not, I had learned to be serious just from teaching. Teaching did wonders for me in making me look at mathematics more carefully than I ever had before, because I had to tell it to people. And that's a great challenge, is to tell it to people and try to be right. So anyway, Eli and Ray called me into Ray's office and sat me down, and they said, like I just mentioned a moment ago, that hey, Sally, you're doing okay. There's a chance you'll get a thesis. And he said, but we're working in an area. And like I said, they were working in semi-simple Lie groups then, and they had published one very beautiful paper and had other things going. And they said, we have to tell you that what you're looking at is not the wave of the future. That semi-simple Lie groups and representation theory is the wave of the future. And they deny they said this, but this is what they said. They said there are more bucks per theorem in semi-simple Lie groups than anywhere else in mathematics now. And I took that to heart, because I needed more bucks per theorem. I was having kids a mile a minute. So anyway, that was where they handed me some papers, and I started to work on their publication from the American Journal of Mathematics. And that turned out reasonably well. As a matter of fact, after about a month, I had proved what I now think I thought of as a theorem. I was so proud of having proved a theorem that I reproved it several times for myself, just for my own enjoyment, to know that I could do something right. It was quite fascinating. And Ray Kunze, he went off to the Institute for Advanced Study with his family and invited me to come down while he was there and talk to him about my work. And Eli Stein was going to be at the Institute too, so I went down there several times to visit. It was great. It was great fun. I got exposed to a different community, the Institute, the Princeton community, and there were some kids from Brandeis who had been undergraduates when I was a graduate student, and they went off to Princeton as graduate students, and I stayed with them, and it was quite an experience. So this was around 1963. I've been teaching at Boston College, was about to have my third kid, and I don't know, I went down to Princeton and saw Ray and Eli, and I got some stuff. I got some real encouragement, and Eli was very encouraging, only too ready to point out my mistakes, but I must say in a very kindly, gentlemanly way. And he was a real help, I have to tell you. Ray was spectacular. He was just a monumentally great thesis advisor for somebody like me, because he's smart. Ray is smart as a whip, but he understood about how to bring me along. I think there's two parts. There's many parts to doing mathematics, but one is the part where you do the mathematics itself, and the other is the part where you have PhD students and direct them in how to do mathematics, and they are two entirely different games. And you have to study one as much as the other in order to be successful at both. And the degree of success, of course, in the one case, depends on how much luck you have in proving theorems, because there's the old Irish saying that no amount of planning ahead will ever take the place of dumb luck. And of course you have to work your butt off in order to get there, but sometimes things just fall your way, sometimes they don't. And the other thing about having PhD students that I'll talk more about later, but you have to get the right kind of students, and then you have to maneuver them into positions, so to speak. And there's an art to that. But in any case, I went down, I visited Ray and Eli, and this was 1963. And Eli had been an assistant professor at the University of Chicago, decided to take a job at Princeton, and Ray had left Brandeis and was moving out to Washington University in St. Louis. Now I had the mathematics bug, there was no question. I wanted to finish a PhD. Kunze left for Washington University, and I packed up my family, 2 kids out and 1 kid in the womb. And in the summer of 1963, we took a plane out of Kennedy Airport. It was then called Idlewild Airport, And we took a plane for St. Louis with 3 kids under 3 and a place to live. And that's another story, is how I got to St. Louis, but all our furniture. But in any case, there we were in St. Louis, ensconced in a beautiful apartment and ready to go to work at Washington University. And Washington University was a very nice place for me. They had a bunch of good analysts, Al Devenatz, with whom I became great buddies, Izzy Hirschman, and Guido Weiss, of course, I got to know. A really fabulous bunch of people, and Ray Kunze was there at the time, and Mitch Tableson in particular, I should mention. So what happened at Washington University is I got on the stick, and I went to the library every day, and I finished my thesis in about 3 months. And this was on universal covering group of SL2R. And it was related to the work of Kunze and Stein. And so that was quite a valuable experience for me, because I learned so much from the people around me. Just like Al Devenatz lived in the next apartment building, and we would talk endlessly about topics in analysis and functional analysis. And Mitch Tableson and I were office mates. As a matter of fact, my second year was a very decisive year. Eli Stein, again, had written to Kunze about the work of 2 Russians, Gelfand and Gryaev, whose work on so-called p-adic groups looked very similar to the work I was doing on real groups. So we decided that we would have a departmental seminar. Now, one of the top people I must mention is Ken Gross. Ken Gross had been in my life since my days at Brandeis. He was a Benny. He was an undergraduate. He was just fresh on the scene, fresh out of high school, and but a great guy. And two others I might mention from the time, Phil Wagreich, who is now at University of Illinois in Chicago, and Armand Brummer, who's at Fordham University. And they were great buddies in mathematics. And Ken was also a great buddy in basketball, which I must say. And he somehow took to Kunze, liked him, and so he went to Washington University as a graduate student, and we sort of rejoined each other at Washington University. And another guy whom I befriended at Washington University was Dick Hunt, who became very famous in analysis with the so-called Carlson-Hunt theorem. After a year at WashU, I had my thesis done and was completely involved in a seminar on p-adic groups. I got to say, there were several turning points in my life. One of the turning point, I brought you back to that, was Sister Mary Stella, who turned me around in the 8th grade and made me do something worthwhile in mathematics. And then Hans Hafele, who guided me on to graduate school despite my reluctance to become serious about mathematics. And then, of course, Ray Kunze, who took over my ship and steered it so that I was able to direct myself towards finishing a thesis. And then, well, this whole group of people at WashU who got me started on studying p-adic groups. We ran a seminar, it was a hell of a seminar, and Mitch Tableson and I wrote a paper which was published in Acta Mathematica. The nicest thing about the paper was it appeared in the same year that Harishchandra's, whose name will arise, Harishchandra, famous mathematician, published his discrete series paper in the same year that Carlson published his Fourier series paper. So Mitch and I didn't quite know what we were talking about, but after I got my PhD at Washington University, I came here, 1965. That's how many years ago? 46 years ago, 45 years ago. And I've been here ever since and have loved every minute of it. When I got here, I ran a seminar in representation theory. Dick Beals was on the spot, was very interested to it. Dick later went to Yale and is a very well-known analyst. Matter of fact, every year there's a crop of fresh instructors at Chicago, and they used to have 4 pure math, quote-unquote pure math instructors and 1 applied math. But the 4 pure math instructors that year, 1965, were Rafi Koifman, who went from here to Washington University to work with Guido Weiss, and then he went to Yale. He got a presidential medal. I don't have to talk much about Rafi. And second one was Dick Hunt, who was here, and then went from here to Princeton and was offered many tenured jobs, ended up at Purdue, mainly because it was close to St. Louis, where his family came from. And George Glauberman, a very well-known group theorist, and he finally ended up taking tenure here after many offers during his instructorship. So it was a good group of instructors. I mean, 4 of us were offered tenured jobs at Chicago. Bill Julian, the applied mathematician, I think he went off to Arizona. We had a good crew of mathematicians. We talked a lot of mathematics. I was mostly involved in analysis at the time, but I was studying this paper that we had started to seminar in St. Louis. So as luck would have it, Mitch Tableson, in the year 1966-67, was at the Institute for Advanced Study. And Harishchandra, who by any measure was the most famous and most useful, I shouldn't say useful is not the word, most helpful mathematician that I ever met, was at the Institute for Advanced Study. Is one of the lights of the last century, without question, in terms of representation theory of semi-simple Lie groups, Fourier analysis, and other areas. And Tableson was at the Institute, and Harishchandra asked him one day to help him about p-adic groups. And Tableson, in all of his munificence and generosity, said, "Why don't you call Paul Selly?" Yay! So in any case, Harishchandra wrote me a letter. "Dear Sally, blah, 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 blah. I hear you know something about p-adic groups. Why don't you come to the Institute for Advanced Study in 1967 and give us some lectures?" Hey, why not? I had a PhD, I had a job already at Chicago, I had been promoted to assistant professor, and sure enough, here was a nice invitation to go to Princeton and learn something about mathematics. While mathematically, that was clearly the highlight of my mathematical career for two reasons. One, I gave some lectures at the Institute in the fall, and the list of names is a very powerful list of strong mathematicians. Atiyah, Sayre, et cetera, Satake and Borel and Harishchandra were all in the audience, and I didn't know enough to be impressed. I have to say something about Harishchandra because the revelation when you meet somebody like that who is so astoundingly superior that you just have to hang on their every word, and it's not because of something they did, but it's because of the way they think about the subject. It entirely changes your frame of mind. And in my mathematical career, I've mentioned some people, but in terms of the research type mathematics, Ray Kunze without doubt opened the door, but Harishchandra without doubt threw every window in the room open and tore the roof off and everything else. He was just unbelievable in listening to him and learning how to think about mathematics. And I was extremely fortunate because he had been working on real groups for a decade and a half or even more, almost 2 decades, knew everything. There was nothing you could tell him about that, but you could tell him something about p-adic groups. And the little that I had to tell him evoked all sorts of images from him that I treasure to this day. I carry that with me. It's the heart and soul of my mathematical life, my contact with Harishchandra. So I actually gave a pretty good set of lectures in the fall of '67. And there was a young mathematician at Princeton named Joe Shalaika, who had done some work along the lines of the p-adic groups and the stuff I was lecturing on. So finally, in January of '68, Shalaika and I got together and we started working. And there's nothing to describe this. Joe just died a couple of weeks ago, and a very sad moment in my life. He was at Johns Hopkins, where he always wanted to be. He took a job at Princeton for a few years just to get out in the world, but he loved Baltimore. He loved the north side, the east side, the west side of Baltimore, Johns Hopkins. He had done some brilliant work on the representation theory of SL2, and for some reason we just hit it. There was no question. I tell the story, I wrote a little letter about him. We were working together in the seminar room in Building C at the Institute for Advanced Study. And this was starting in January of '68. And we would work there 8 or 10 hours a day and fill every blackboard in the place. And just we're having the time of our lives. And everything we thought was true. That's what I was talking about, dumb luck earlier. Harishchandra was sort of our mentor and our overseer at the time. He really advised us about directions to go and what to see, what to look for. And the paper of his written in the early 1950s was sort of our guideline about what to prove. We wanted to get the character theory, we wanted to do the Plancherel formula, and we wanted to get Fourier transform of so-called elliptic orbital integrals. And Harish-Chandra had paved the way for real groups, and Shalike and I wanted to do the same for p-adic groups. So we would just work all day and yell at each other and have a marvelous time, and then the day would end and the days were getting longer, and we would walk. There's a golf course right outside the Institute for Advanced Studies, so we would walk across the golf course to Alexander Street and Andy's Tavern, and we would go in and have 4 or 5 beers and 2 or 3 cheeseburgers and talk about the day's work. And it's one of those things, there's this Soroyan play, The Time of Our Lives. Well, that's what we felt like at the time. That was the time of our lives. There was no precedent to it and no way it would ever be duplicated in the future. So Joe and I really got together, and we drew a lot of attention mathematically because we had gone plowing into this area where Harish-Chandra was the expert and had produced some interesting results. So at that time, that got me tenure at Chicago. It got Joe his job at Johns Hopkins, although he was brilliant. He did a million other things too. And so I came back here in fall of '68 and got tenure that year, went back to Princeton in 1969, finished up my work with Joe, and here I was sitting with tenure at Chicago, and my father, the good old Irishman, I remember his statement. He said, "I'm glad you ended up with a good job." And that was his assessment, and I was glad my dad was pleased that I ended up with a good job, because he was a fantastic man. I came back to Chicago and I got tenure, and the Vietnam War was raging at the time, as anybody who lived at that time knows, and there were sit-ins on campus, there were sit-ins at Berkeley, free speech movement, and at Columbia, and there was, of course, a sit-in here on campus. And I took it sort of metz. I didn't like the war. I had protested when I was at Washington University. A bunch of us wrote a letter to McGeorge Bundy in 1963, and we were considered the worst commies in the world and stuff like that for protesting that the war didn't seem to make sense. Of course, 20 years later, everybody admitted that it didn't make sense, but it was perhaps a bit too late. But in any case, I got very much involved in protests against the war, but the main reason was the following: that we had a sit-in here at Chicago, as I mentioned. The reason is of no consequence, but the kids sat in, and they messed up the administration building a little bit. They pulled out some files and they got ketchup on the walls. And the president of the university called up all the faculty. Dick Lashoff was chairman of the department then, and called up all the faculty, and the faculty were to tour the administration building to see what devastation the students had wrought upon the administration building. And of course, these people had never seen devastation wrought by a street gang or anything like that. They thought that their students were not properly behaved. All right, that's fine. But what had happened is that the students sat in, they protested, the university didn't give in on anything, and the students marched out several days later. The university had one hands down. The battle lines were clear, and the university had held their own. So what did they decide to do? They decided to start kicking kids out a mile a minute. They took our top math major and expelled him. The kid had already been admitted to Princeton Graduate School. And so they got my dander up a little bit. So for some reason, I became head of a faculty committee to protest against the disciplinary action against students. well, that means I became a hated man on campus. It was very interesting. People that I thought liked me no longer liked me. They didn't spit on me because I'd have punched their face out, but they were not polite. I didn't care. That was not the point. The point is, and there were several activities on campus, I must say. We had the Society for Violent Non-Action, the SVNA, were very active at the time. They would go around digging trenches on campus when the kids were shot at Kent State and a number of other things. And they formed a sub-society called SPERM, which was the Society for the Protection of Equal Rights for Men. And they created a great deal of humor on campus at the time. But in any case, I became known as a radical, and there were rallies all over campus against the Vietnam War and against Nixon and everything in sight, because people were excited, and Jesse Jackson came to campus and talked to a student audience in Rockefeller Chapel. So it was an interesting time for me because I had never thought of myself as a hated person. I always thought of myself as a not particularly liked person, but that's not the same as hated, you know. I usually said what I felt and let it lie there. So this is one of the highlights of my life. There are several, and I've told you some of them already that relate to my professional career, but there was a guy named Houston Stevens, a black guy who had been in Vietnam. He was tough as nails. Used to hang around campus all the time and call for the students to invade all the buildings and tear down this or that. And Houston was quite a campus personality and went around, as I said, in his Army fatigues and with sunglasses and a Army hat on. And I used to stand around the campus and wherever there were rallies and break up fights. That was my goal at the time, is just take it off campus. And I was big enough. I was 6'3" and weighed about 195, so I could handle that very well. But I was standing over in Mandel Hall, which is one of the major meeting places on campus one day, standing at the back and watching the audience. And Houston Stevens was up on the stage at Mandel Hall, and he was, "We're going to kill those mothers and those white honkies," and so forth, and every other word in the book. And I was standing just listening because I had heard it before, and this gentleman walked up to me, short little gentleman with a clerical collar on. It turns out it was Mr. Pike, who was the assistant chaplain at Rockefeller Chapel. And he stood beside me, and I said, "Good morning," and he said, "Good morning." And then he looked up at Houston Stevens, and he turned to me and said, "Oh my, that is violent." And then he looked at me again, he said, "Is that Paul Sally up there?" Well, I got to tell you, I was honored. I figured I had really made it when the assistant chaplain at Rockefeller Chapel thought that I was black, had a Vietnam War record, and would be cursing the white race. It was a very interesting event in my life. So that didn't last much longer, the radicalism, but I think I still, 40 years later or so, I'm still known as a radical on campus. And I am, but in my own way, not in that way. I certainly had tenure in the bag, and I went back to the Institute for 1971, 72, and met a bunch of remarkable people, Roger Howe and Peter Tromby and Alan Silberger and a bunch of others, and gave some lectures again. But my career had been pointed in a certain direction at that stage. Whether it got slightly sent awry by the so-called radical activity, I'll never find out, but I'm not sorry about it. But I got very involved in the undergraduate program at that time at the university. Sure enough, I think Diane, I might say, entered the scene in 1975, wasn't it?
Right.
75, she came as a graduate student. I had been involved in the undergraduate program since the minute I came here, because I loved the teaching. I won the so-called Quantrell Award, which is the university's award for excellence in undergraduate teaching, which I might point out Diane has also received. But it was really that period from 1960 to 1970 where I really had to concentrate on mathematics and get done what had to be done to get here. And I was here. And just to state an aside, I have never lost my interest in mathematics, not by a long shot. But I've also pursued a variety of other things, one of which is the undergraduate program at Chicago. At that time, it was in the hands of 3 senior faculty members who were in what they called the College of the University of Chicago in the 1950s, Herman Meyer and Isaac Versup and Al Putnam. And they were running the undergraduate program together. But as I say, I started to get involved in thinking about it, and I was teaching undergraduates a lot. I was also teaching graduate courses at the same time. But I liked it very much. And when Diane came in '75, her first year, all the graduate students at Chicago, their first year, they have no duties. They just are supposed to study. Diane can talk about that as she pleases. And their second year, they are college fellows, which means they're assistant to a senior faculty member. And she was an assistant to this gentleman I named Al Putnam, who was one of the people running the undergraduate program. And I think you might say that was a worthwhile experience.
It was
right?
fabulous.
Yeah.
It's a good year for the graduate students here to take the time to learn to teach and do all the other stuff you have to learn to do to handle a class full of college students.
We handle this slightly differently at Chicago. That is that we take our second-year students, and they're not TAs, they're so-called college fellows, which means they are attached to a senior faculty member teaching an undergraduate course. They go to all the lectures, they hold office hours, they help to make out and grade exams, and then after a certain amount of time, they are allowed to lecture in front of the students under the supervision of the senior faculty member. We get our second-year graduate students prepared to teach, I should say, in a very careful way. So Diane was Putnam's college fellow, and then she continued to work on her PhD thesis, and she and I would talk together a lot about various undergraduate matters and things like that. But anyway, I started to have PhD students, which is another facet of the whole business that I mentioned before.
And you're chair too, right?
I was chair. Yeah, I happened to be chair of the department from 1977 to 1980. That was when my left eye blew out from diabetic complications, and it was okay. Felix Browder had been chair before me, and he was chair after me, and I sort of filled in the middle of the sandwich, so to speak. And I would consider it one of my most memorable times, but there were other things going on. In particular, I was having good graduate students, which has to be the joy of this business, as coaching graduate students, because you always feel that, hey, you'd like to do this nice piece of work. And I was publishing papers, and I was publishing up until 1980. It was about 1 paper a year or so. I did some nice work with Becky Herb and with Garth Warner, beyond the work that I had done with Shalaika. I never worked with Shalaika again. We had our day, and he went on to do some really creative stuff with Jacquet and Castleman and people like that. I must say, I've continued to think about mathematics, and to come back to the topic about whether you coach mathematics or do mathematics is a very interesting thing. I don't mean teach mathematics. I still do that. I still love to do it. I can't wait to get in front of a classroom. But coaching mathematics is having PhD students who need to understand the subject that they're working on and what the ramifications are of the projects they're pursuing, etc. And my goal is not to have my PhD students achieve granting of the PhD, but to go on and do some serious research in the field. And so far, I've been reasonably lucky. Two things that lent additional features to my life. One was I got elected to the Council of the American Mathematical Society. It was about 1980, 1981. And I had served on some committees with the American Mathematical Society and been to many conferences and talked to a lot of people, so it wasn't as though it was a strange environment, but being a member of the council and then a member of the executive committee of the council, which is a role in which you sit in on all the meetings of the board of trustees and represent the general membership. And to follow up on that, after I was a member of the executive committee of the council, that was till about the mid-80s or mid-80s, then I became a member of the board of trustees. This was at a time when the American Math Society was in the depths financially. They were really in trouble financially. And I stayed on the trustees for 10 years, up until the early 90s. And it was interesting. It was interesting to be a part of the way the math business runs. And if it's research mathematics, its business runs through the American Mathematical Society. Now, it's just because I didn't have enough to do, the University of Chicago started to run a school mathematics project. The world was alive with protests about education, especially education in mathematics. And so, A Nation at Risk, that report came out of Washington, and everybody was stunned at how bad the educational system was in the United States. And the University of Chicago, with the partnership with Amico Corporation, got together and formed the University of Chicago School Mathematics Project. Now there's some very strong, or there were at the time, some extremely strong math educators in the education department. They wanted it to be a joint mathematics education venture. And they looked around in mathematics, and Putnam and Meyer and Viersup were still functioning, but they were getting very old. But on the other hand, Viersup was strongly behind this project and raised a tremendous amount of money to get us started. But I was, shall I say, chosen as the first director of the University of Chicago School Mathematics Project. Well, that presented me with an entirely new world. Here I had been buzzing along in the world of mathematics, having an enormously good time, and all of a sudden I was director of the University of Chicago School Mathematics Project, and I was on the executive committee of the Council of the American Math Society and the trustees of the American Math Society. Meanwhile, I was having PhD students, and some very good ones. And I was still trying to do mathematics, but it went a little more slowly there in the 80s. But the experiences I had were extremely valuable for somebody like me who likes to know who runs things and how they run, and see if you can get at the heart of the problem if there are any problems. And education was and is a major problem in the United States, and mathematics education is still a major problem, and there are a whole bunch of fakes and phonies wandering the streets trying to find the correct way to do it, as long as they can get enough money from various and sundry sources to do it. And I still operate a big program here at the university with the Chicago Public Schools and with the Young Scholars Program for gifted kids and with an outreach program to minorities at the university, et cetera, et cetera. And I might mention my old buddy Ken Gross. Ken ran a superb education program in Vermont called the Vermont Mathematics Initiative. And Hugo, I might say, is involved with it too. And what it is, it's a really spectacular way to train elementary school teachers at the early stages. The programs I run are mostly for middle grade teachers and for high school teachers. And so Ken and I complement each other beautifully, and we're getting together to really save the world from mathematics education.
What was your role as the director of UCSMP, and how did that get you involved in the Chicago Public Schools?
Well, that's my role was to be the leader of a position that had no definition. Clearly, my role was to, first of all, raise money and try to give a direction to the project. The main principle of University of Chicago School Mathematics Project was that quality mathematics is the name of the game. Now, over the years, that has manifested itself in different ways. Roles 1 and 2 were, first of all, to produce a secondary curriculum, which was different from those currently available. This was done by Zalyu Siskin. He wrote it was called the University of Chicago Curriculum, and he wrote textbooks beginning with perhaps the most prominent one was called Transition Mathematics, which is supposed to be a transition from elementary mathematics to high school mathematics. He then followed that up with Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, et cetera, the upper level high school curriculum. And he wrote that. He's a very talented curriculum writer. I don't want to try to assess the curriculum, but it was regarded as highly successful. The actual elementary curriculum, although it took more time to develop, resulted in Everyday Mathematics, which is now, I believe, the #1 bestseller in America as far as elementary curricula go. And it has its flaws, and a lot of people complain about it, and the country is full of all sorts of people who have all sorts of things to say about education, and we would all be much better off if instead of blabbing off, they would get into the trenches and do some work. But as to my own role, it was initially to raise more money. So I would go down to the board of directors of Amoco Corporation, and the idea was to convince them that we could do the job. And these were not a bunch of mamby-pambies. These people who actually understood that there was hard work required to make any dent in the education establishment. So they would ask me questions, and then every once in a while they would just ask me something like, well, you're asking us to put $8 million into this project. Aren't you just pissing in the lake? Well, that's all right. He was on the board of directors from Amoco, and he had all the money, so I was required to answer. So I answered just like Patrick Henry. Shall we lie here supinely on our backs, hugging the delusive phantom of hope, while the chains of the British Army are clanking on the plains of Boston? He nodded, and he said, let me take that down. I want to use that in future talks. And then I had to go to a lot of education conferences and learned a whole new establishment. There's something like the American Mathematical Society, which has a much broader scope of involvement than just the research community. There are people interested in a variety of things within the American Mathematical Society. But the educational community was something brand new, because wallowing in mediocrity seemed to be the sign on everybody's door. And I went around talking at conferences and try to proclaim that we should not embrace mediocrity, but try to do something substantive about education in mathematics. After 4 years as director, I guess I said to myself, if I do this anymore, I will go bananas. So I resigned as director of the project, and I worked with the teacher development component. That was an interesting start. We had some money, and we worked with teachers from around the country and tried to introduce them to the new curriculum and actually do some mathematics of a serious nature. And then I decided that UCSMP was going to go its own way. And it became a project where the curriculum was the sole name of the game. And I started projects within the Department of Mathematics. You and I started the Young Scholars Program in 1988, which wasn't really an offshoot of UCSMP, but it was part of these education activities, and certainly our contacts with Laura Bornholt and Rick Ronvik when we started that project came through UCSMP.
Right, those are the people from the gifted office of the Chicago
Well,
Public Schools.
Laura worked over in the ad building,
Right.
if you recall, and Rick Ronvik
Right.
came from the CPS, Chicago Public Schools. So that there was certainly that effect. Diane and I started this Young Scholars Project in 1988, and it's still going full speed today. And Diane, as a matter of fact, she was the first teacher in the project and taught a course to a bunch of 7th and 8th graders, some of whom have emerged to be pretty talented people here 20 years later or so. Some of them have their PhDs in mathematics, some of them are in business, but they're all, a number of them are very well known. And then the next year we added a high school component, and Aruna Slalavicius, the topologist, taught the high school. And then I entered the game in 1981. I was a director right from the beginning, but I started to teach in it. And 91, sorry, right, thank you. And the years tend to blur after a while, but 1991, and I must say to this day that's one of the joys of my life. If I put together the priorities, that's in the top 5. Having it a bunch of young people who are eager to do mathematics, want to hear everything you have to say, are willing to tackle any problem you give them, and never give up and come back the next week or the next day for more training. So that I consider the Young Scholars Program to be a major achievement, and there are other great ones around the country. I mean, the Ross Program at Ohio State, and Kelly's program at Amherst, and Promise in Boston at BU, Glenn Stevens and his gang. I love these. Max Warshawski down in Texas. I mean, these programs for young people are just the greatest thing in the world.
I think ours is nice, and one of the things we like about it, both of us, is that it's local and pulls in Chicago Public School students who you wouldn't necessarily get in a nationwide search.
I think that's right. And the other fact that it doesn't cost money.
Right.
It's a completely free program. And as a matter of fact, we provide lunches. We have, as a matter of fact, a national project here, copyrighted project. We hand out little pink slips.
Right.
And only this past year did I raise the lunch money stipend to $5. It used to be $4.
For 20 years.
Huh?
For 20 years, it was $4.
For 20 years, it was $4, and these are little pink cards stamped Department of Mathematics, University of Chicago, and $4 written on them. And if you wanted to see anything during this progress of this project, it was the way kids could use their imagination to change $4 to $5, $4 to $8, anything larger than $4. But now I've gone to $5, and we didn't have much trouble this summer. So that was one of the things that wasn't part of the University of Chicago School Math Project, but certainly was part of our overall desire. We had the Ross program visit Chicago Arnold Ross came to Chicago in the mid-1970s when he was around 70 years old. Good old Arnold, he thought, well, he had to hand the program off to somebody because he wanted it to last beyond age 70. So he stayed here for 3 years. Arnold Ross got his PhD here under Ellie J. Dixon in number theory back in the 1930s. And he loved being here, and we ran the program for him, but then he decided he didn't like it so much, so he went back to Ohio State to run the program. And we tried to continue running that, but running a worldwide program with all the residential aspects turned out to be too hard for us, and raising the money year in, year out was not easy. So we were approached by the Board of Education, and somebody from the Board of Education in Chicago Public Schools in 1987, and decided to run a project. And it's still running. It's good. Diane was a major part of the program over the past 22 years. I can give you the details of the Young Scholars Program. About 1992, we started to get some federal money from the National Science Foundation, and the program runs for the month, the summer program, I should say, runs for the month of July, runs every day from 9:30 to 2:30, and involves 3 components. The components are the 7th, 8th grade component, which gathers kids who have just got out of the 7th grade, just out of the 8th grade, or the 9th, 10th grade component, which refers to kids. I should back it up a little bit. The 7th, 8th grade component takes kids out of the 6th grade, and the kids out of the 8th grade can go in the 7th, 8th grade component, or if they've already had some exposure to algebra, will go in the 9th, 10th grade. 9th, 10th grade takes on kids who have just emerged from the 9th and 10th grade, and the 11th, 12th grade take kids who have emerged mostly from the 11th grade, but also from the 10th grade, who are ahead of in the curriculum. And it's established that the major theme one year will be number theory. And what do we mean by number theory? We mean a good experience in number theory. Diane and I have written a book. It starts with study of primes, divisibility, congruence classes, all the major theorems that one would have in a standard undergraduate university number theory course, not a high school course. As a matter of fact, this is not intended to enrich the high school curriculum. It's intended to diversify it so that kids get some exposure to mathematics instead of the stuff they see in high school, which even at the level of AP calculus is pure nonsense. They stuff kids with formulas and they don't teach them about how to do things. So we do number theory one summer. The next summer we do geometry. That's the focus, but geometry takes on a variety of aspects. So at the 11th, 12th grade level, the number theory might take on the study of finite fields and their structure and so forth, and the geometry the next summer might take on the study of nuts and the study of basic topology and a little homotopy theory and things like that. Stuff that the kids can do and engage in, but not within the high school curriculum. The idea of running it from post 6th grade to post 11th grade is that many kids come and they stay for 2 years. They take number theory the first year, geometry the second year, then they'll move from there into the 9th, 10th grade component, where the level of the number theory and geometry is much higher, much more rigorous, and extends the horizons much more broadly. And finally, by the 11th, 12th grade component, which I just explained to you, they are into university level mathematics, but topics of considerable interest. And we've managed to keep it going by various and sundry devices. The American Math Society gives us some support, the National Science Foundation, the Materials Science and Research Engineering Center gives us support. Every major research project on a university campus has to have some outreach, and we have sacrificed ourselves on the altar of finance to serve as the outreach project for anybody who wants to give us money. So that's the way we keep the Young Scholars Program. Now, the Sesame program, on the other hand, really did emerge from the University of Chicago School Mathematics Project, and it's designed to help middle school teachers earn endorsement for teaching of mathematics and science in the middle grades. The pitiful part about preparation of teachers in the United States is that there's virtually no mathematics in that process. They might have one methods course taught by a person who doesn't know any mathematics, taught two persons who don't know any mathematics, who exercise themselves by cutting up little patterns on tables. And so we decided, based on our experience with the School Mathematics Project, that we would try to give an endorsement program for middle grade teachers. And so we have about 200 to 250 teachers show up here every Wednesday afternoon, and we give them a variety of courses in number theory, geometry, probability theory, math methods, a variety of courses like that, in which history of mathematics is another one, in which we try to engage them in the study of mathematics so they have something to take back to their classroom. We've been running for 20 years now, almost 19 years with the Sesame program. Sesame, incidentally, stands for Seminars for Endorsement in Science and Mathematics Education, which is one of my more brilliant creative products of my life, having Sesame fit the process so that everybody thinks we're opening doors. And we're trying to, but I'll tell you that middle grade teachers in the urban areas need some serious mathematics taught to them. And I can give you one incident comes out of it. We were doing the division algorithm in a number theory course I'm teaching at the moment, and the Euclidean algorithm, and the idea was to find the greatest common divisor of two positive integers. And I had two reactions. One reaction was from one teacher who said, "This seems very hard." And we said, well, of course it's hard, but kids can use this to find the greatest common divisor of two positive integers. And she said, yeah, but will they ever use it? And we said, well, maybe a kid will ask about what's the best way to do it. And she said, oh, no kid will ever ask that. Well, that's rather dismissive. But nonetheless, that's one attitude that teachers have. Another attitude, at the same time in the same class, and this is what delights my life, another teacher said, I did that with my kids and they hated it. But after 3 times, they loved it and were asking for more numbers to work the algorithm on. So that's what you hope to hear, is that teachers will absorb good mathematics, will try it in their classroom, and will come back saying, after I persisted and worked hard with it and taught the kids how to understand it, they realized that it's good for them. So Sesame is a project that's designed to give endorsement in teaching of middle school mathematics and science in the Chicago Public Schools. And stunningly enough, the Chicago Public Schools have passed the following legislation. It's almost too difficult to believe that any teacher who teaches mathematics, science, language arts, or social studies in 6th, 7th, 8th grade in Chicago Public Schools must be a specialist. And there is only one way to become a specialist, that's get endorsed in the subject. So that is something I started on as director of UCSMP, the School Math Project, 25 years ago, and after 25 years it's come into being. There's always the problem of whether the endorsement programs are worth the paper they're written on, but that's another argument. The point is that something is happening. Part of the outgrowth of this education venture has been the Young Scholars Program and Sesame itself. And also, there's a lot of outreach going on campus, and at least here in the mathematics department, we try to have control over the outreach in mathematics so that it maintains a certain level of quality. Sesame, the state endorsement requires 3 courses of a pedagogical nature. One is called Curriculum and Philosophy in the middle grades. I don't understand what that means, but we give it. The second is called Adolescent Psychology, and it requires a 30-hour course, and we have somebody from the psych department giving that. I might mention that I have my own course in adolescent psychology. It takes about 5 minutes. It's called Shape Up or Ship Out. And then there's a course which actually can be a valuable one, which is Mathematical Methods for Teaching in grades 6 to 8, where you really learn about how to use curriculum, how to devise problems and things like that. Then there are 5 content courses chosen from among geometry. I mentioned before, geometry, number theory, history of mathematics, probability and statistics, calculus for elementary school teachers, and additional strategies in mathematics, which is the course I'm giving at the moment. That is, try to introduce teachers to problems which can be fascinating to their kids based on the material that they've developed in class. I might also go back to Ken Gross. I've mentioned several times I'm trying to envelop his Vermont Mathematics Initiative into this so that we can really get to town. We do have one example of things that have happened with Sesame and its outreach. That is the so-called Algebra Initiative in Chicago. There was a story about it in the Notices of the American Mathematical Society, August 2010, where 3 universities in the area, DePaul, University of Illinois at Chicago, and University of Chicago, have formed a cohort of mathematicians, people from the math department, who give a serious algebra course for 3 quarters during an academic year, and the teachers who want to teach algebra in the 8th grade or 7th grade must take that course, and then after they take the course, they must pass an exam that determines whether they're capable of teaching the material. And this is almost unheard of, that we can actually question teachers, and if they don't pass the exam, they either can take the course over or take the exam over once, and about 60% eventually pass. So we actually have some quality control. At the other end of that program, the school system has contributed to us so that they have a strong set of requirements for 8th grade kids to enter algebra, which include A is attendance, B is performance in the previous grades like 6th and 7th, performance on state tests, which I don't regard as the be-all and end-all, but there's some indicator along with other activities, and then the overall approval of their teacher. They can then take the course. But at the end of the course, there is also an exit exam in which the students who have taken this algebra from a certified teacher, note that the algebra course cannot be offered to 8th graders other than a teacher who's been certified through the Algebra Initiative. And the exit exam determines whether or not the kids have absorbed enough algebra to be excused from high school algebra. So many people around the country, your own Governor Schwarzenegger, for example, I think has promoted 8th grade algebra, or maybe he's not anymore. But it became the law in California that they were going to give 8th grade algebra. Of course, there were only 2 problems, the teachers and the students. Other than that, there's no difficulties with 8th grade algebra. So here, at least in Chicago, we weed the students carefully, we weed the teachers carefully, and we have a program going and about 60% of the students pass the exit exam and are allowed by legislation of the Board of Education to skip first year high school algebra and go on to either Algebra 2 or geometry. And there was some initial reluctance on the part of the high schools about accepting the decision of the middle grades to release students to high school algebra. But after the bunch of mathematicians sat down with the high school teachers and they know who we are and what kind of mathematics we can do, there wasn't a problem. So it's now accepted and it's working away. And you might say, how good is this in a school system of 400,000 students where you might have 5,000 students taking algebra? The point is, it's in 200 elementary schools. The number of students taking it isn't necessarily overwhelming, but we're spreading throughout the city. There's about 7 or 8 gifted centers in the city for 7th and 8th grade. These kids are fine. They don't have to take algebra in the 8th grade from a certified teacher. Those teachers were already certified years ago. It's trying to spread it and ramp it up throughout the city, and we've managed to do that, and we'll continue to do so. So that's been one of the outcomes of this whole Sesame project. So I might say that's involved a little bit of my time over the last several years, last 20 or 25 years. What kind of techniques do you use in teaching? And Diane can sell some of her tales too. Ever since I started teaching in 1954, but principally at Boston College High School in 1955, I talked to the students. I talked to them incessantly. As you may gather from this diatribe I'm engaged in, I love to talk. It's called Irish Blarney. But I like to talk to them about mathematics. How do you keep the students awake in the class? By asking them questions. How do you learn what questions to ask them? By understanding what their capabilities are. You always try to ask a student questions that are a little bit harder than the ones they can answer readily. You don't want to ask them trivial questions, but you do want to engage in conversation. By the end of the first week, whether I can see or not, I know the name of every kid in that class. The first name, I call on them by name.
While we're here, talk about your grids, your coordinate system.
My coordinate system. Yeah, this is a great way to identify. Kids love this. They buy it at every grade level, starting with the 6th grade. You enter the class and you say, I'm going to establish a coordinate system, and that seat over there is 1, 1. And the horizontal axis goes this way, and the vertical axis goes that way. You have a coordinate. So you already have a system of engaging in conversation. You ask them what their coordinates are. And there's a lot of conversation in the class, and after about a week or two, and I know their names, they'd still rather be called by their coordinates. One of my former undergraduate students, who is now a graduate student here working with Drinfeld, got married back in the spring, and I went to the wedding, but I met his wife-to-be, and it turns out she had had a class with me back about 5 or 6 years ago. And I said, oh, that's very nice. And she said, I was in your class. I said, where did you sit? And she said, 3-3. So I immediately knew, oh, Margalit. I immediately knew who it was and where she sat. So the fact that the students are aware that you know that they are there, that you understand that they may or may not like to answer the questions, but they have to participate. One of the great aspects of teaching is called wait time. And so I have a little speech that I give about how to teach. You begin at the very bottom or top, depending on where you are, with what is called the sponge faucet method. Students love me to tell this story because at the beginning of the quarter, the student is the sponge and you push them under the faucet, and the teacher is the faucet. They turn on the water. And during the entire quarter, they never turn around, never turn the water off, continually write, and at the end of the quarter, they pick up the sponge and they go, yeah! squeezing all that knowledge out on the final exam. And there are many teachers who do that. Diane has always talked. I think you learned from Putt, didn't you?
Right.
Yeah. This guy, Al Putnam, that we mentioned before, he taught you how to talk to your students. But on the other hand, I had that right from day one. I stepped in front of a classroom. I was 21. Some of the kids in front of me were 18 and 19. They were playing football for BC High, and they wanted to take me on. But that was another story. The fact of the matter is I talked to them. I talked to them about mathematics. I asked them questions, and I still do the same to this day. And the other teaching methods, however, are famous. The teacher will be at the board, and they'll write for 10 minutes, and they'll turn around and say, they don't turn all the way around to face the students. That's forbidden. But they do turn around their head, and they say, okay? And before there's any answers, they, okay. Then there's this method 3 is the teacher turns and faces the class, which is real bravery, and says, any questions? And before anybody can ask, they turn around and start writing on the board again. Then comes the answer to the any questions, which is people start speaking up, but it's usually 3.5 people from any class. 3 who speak up all the time, and 1 who speaks up once in a while. And they either put up their hands when there's a question asked, or they speak up themselves. The rest of the class prays to God that they won't be called on and sit mercifully shy in their chairs. Then it progresses through how much you talk to the kids. But what would you say, how often do you talk to your kids?
Well, it's a lot like you. Try to talk to every student, every class. Once they open their mouth and talk in class, then they're not afraid to ask questions or answer your questions. You do the same. We send our faculty to go visit our graduate students and observe them when they're teaching. It's part of our whole teaching program here, is to get the thesis advisors to go watch their own graduate students teach, so they have an idea of what kind of a teaching product they're putting out there when their students go for jobs. And we sent Professor Kotwitz to visit Kathy, and he watched her teach, and she had been my college fellow and did all of this talking, knew the students by name, called on everyone, and he came back, was like a changed man. First of all, he thought that was miraculous that she was doing that, and then I suggested to him that he might consider doing that in his class, and no, I wouldn't want to, I would be afraid to embarrass my students and call, and I said, just give it a try. Learn their names, give it a try. And he did it, and he thought it was fabulous, and he really was a convert. But it's we try to make that work with the graduate students, and there's no better model than Paul, I think.
Well, there's you too. I mean, and Bowler too. I mean, the idea that the people who run the undergraduate program here, I'm the director of undergraduate studies. Diane is my co-director, and John Bowler, who was a PhD student of mine about 10 years ago, has come back from being a prefect at Harvard for about 4 or 5 years, and he's a spectacular teacher. And the basis of our teaching is we talk. We extract information from the people taking the course so that they themselves must be ready to encounter the mathematics. Nobody waits for the midterm. Nobody waits for the final. I think Diane and John and I and others who do this, you could give your kid a grade before the final exam. We always give final exams, but the idea is that you get to know so much about the kids. You get to know about how they react to certain mathematical questions. You get to understand whether they have the capability to answer certain questions. One of the nice things about tests is you learn how the kids perform on a written test, and then you try to build on that quality, whether they perform poorly or very well. You try to build on the quality that they show when they have a written test. So it's always the combination of evaluating students that you must talk to them, understand how they feel about the mathematics, how they answer to questions readily, and you do even better to the ones that come into your office all the time and want to talk. I mean, the whole idea in teaching is getting to know how the students are thinking about the subject. And of course, what you're trying to do is make them live the subject 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And sometimes you can when you're in the midst of a course. The other facet that we've started to use, especially at the upper level, is inquiry-based learning, which is a process by which we hand the students a script with definitions and examples and theorems, but no proofs, and they themselves are required to get up in front of the class, the students, without any adult intervention. I'll modify that in a minute, but without any adult intervention, and present the material, and the other students in the class are supposed to comment, and it's all about peer interaction. And it's an old process invented by a PhD from the University of Chicago named R.L. Moore. It's known as the Moore method. Now, Moore was a steely-eyed drill instructor who forbade the students to talk to each other or look at books or sometimes even sleep at night. I'm not sure about the rules he had, but they were extensive. But you were supposed to learn the mathematics on your own. Well, we've introduced that into the Young Scholars Program. As a matter of fact, it's been introduced into our undergraduate program. Diane and I taught the first course, 5 years ago we taught?
Probably.
Where Diane had a script from her undergraduate days at Allegheny College, which fit beautifully into the idea that the students should get the script and engage themselves in presenting it to the other students in this class. They had a class of about 20 students. There's a bunch of oilmen and cattlemen. Maybe they weren't cattlemen, but that's what you think of when you think of Texas. They come up oilmen and cattlemen. And they liked this R.L. Moore program that I was telling you about before. And what R.L. Moore made his students do was stand on their own 2 feet and present. Now, R.L. Moore himself had some brilliant mathematical students, but it's not at all clear that technique would work 75 years later, because the level of mathematics that you have to understand to get deeply involved in one of today's research problems requires a lot of reading and discussion. It would be extremely hard for somebody to do it on their own in this day and age. But be that as it may, we have found it's an incredibly valuable experience for students to get up and develop the material in a classroom on their own. Now this, I would say, in answer to the questions I've had, this is the ultimate in student participation. They run the class. Now, some senior faculty member will be in charge of the class, which means you can't let them run too far afield, because students have funny ideas about what it means to do too much on your own. You have to guide them with a script. You have to guide them with a certain amount of supervision. But by golly, those kids get together, they have sessions outside of class, they prepare for the presentation, and they're not told ahead of time who's going to present. Everybody in the class is eligible to participate, so to speak, and we bring them to the board, call on them, and gee, it's turned out to be a fascinating part. So these oilmen and cattlemen from Texas had come up to promote the R.L. Moore program. And it's not clear to me what they promised, but it seemed like they were promising riches. That has not materialized, but on the other hand, we have found the program to be invaluable in our own undergraduate activities, and I've extended it into the Young Scholars Program, the Sesame Program. Everywhere we do mathematics, we try to use some inquiry-based learning, because why? What was the point that these Texas people had? It endows an individual with great self-confidence about getting up in front of an audience. Now, I'll give you some feedback, not from our undergraduate program. We've had very good feedback there. But in our teacher training program, Urban Teacher Education Program, I've used this for training elementary school teachers for the last 5 or 6 years. And they come back after a couple of years in the field and they say, that was just great. That's just what I needed, the ability to stand up and not be afraid that somebody was going to ask me a bad question that I wouldn't know how to answer, because I have been there and people have asked me bad questions. And I know that I can handle it either by putting it off or giving an alternate answer, not faking. Faking is not allowed in this, but giving an alternate answer or saying that I will come back tomorrow with the answer to that question, having enough confidence in our own mathematical training to handle an assault on their knowledge of the subject.
Wouldn't you say, though, you had a learning curve in trying to figure out how to be a leader in an inquiry-based learning course? When we taught together that first year, it was both of us had to learn to shut up.
Yeah, this is so fascinating, because the one thing you have to do in teaching an inquiry-based learning course is learn to shut up. That the propensity of mathematicians, this is really wonderful to watch too, when you have a mathematician who knows mathematics sit in a classroom of kids who are being taught mathematics, and the desire of the mathematician to point out that the kid doesn't quite have it right. No, you've got to do it this way. A knowledge to show that, of course, the individual giving the advice is smarter than the individual who is taking the advice. But the learning curve in inquiry-based learning is really very good. It takes place rather rapidly, but you have to learn, number one, to shut up. Number two, when not to shut up. That is, there are certain times when a comment by the mentor or instructor will serve a purpose. And there are certain times when you have to be a little bit too careful about overstating it, even though it's valuable information. So that has turned out to be something that's one has to learn. And I point out, where has this taken place other than our undergraduate classrooms? I pointed out in the Young Scholars Program, we have our undergraduate math majors as counselors in the summer program for the month of July. I didn't mention that the Young Scholars Program, besides its dimension in the month of July, and I don't know whether I mentioned about 100 kids come for the month of July, but we also have a program during the academic year which we open up to every kid in Chicago, and they get a diagnostic exam, and we then cut it down to about 40 high school kids and about 40 elementary school kids, and we try to bring their mathematical development along during the academic year. But the rules of the game for the counselors are quite interesting. What is the role? In the Young Scholars Program, what we do is we have an interactive dialogue with them for about an hour and a quarter in the morning. And this is just what Diane has done this, I've done this. We talk to them all the time. The real goal one should have is every kid in the class should get a question every day. Now that turns out to be very hard when you're teaching a class of 50, so maybe it's every other day, but you try to make sure that all the kids are called on. On the other hand, in the counseling groups, the undergraduates are assigned 4 or 5 high school kids or junior high school kids, and they go off into a room to solve problems. And our rule is the following: if you are seen at the blackboard, you will be fired. That's to the counselors, because their goal is to sit in the classroom and promote interactivity among the kids, have them develop their own ideas, but don't try to impose your own ideas on the kids. So it's a very tough job. And once again, the propensity of the undergraduate counselors, just like the propensity of faculty members, is they can see something way ahead of time, so they will try to point it out. And you got to tell them, the kids know you're smart, but that's not the reason you're there. Your reason is to make these kids in your class smart by helping them along the road. So we try to impose this discourse method of teaching at all times.
I wanted to ask you about the undergraduate program because since you became the director, the program's grown a lot. So just talk about what makes this program work so well.
I had gotten very interested in the undergraduate program the day I arrived in Chicago, especially because the students are good and you get to teach honors people and people I taught, like Frank Wilczek, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics, and David Vogan at MIT, and Bob Oliver, the topologist. These were just such a joy to teach. They're spectacular. And that rolled along beautifully, and then in the 1980s, maybe early in the 1980s, it turned out that Maya Virsup and Putnam, they finally had to retire. They were in their 70s, and for one reason or another, they were going to stop running the program. So Felix Browder, who was chair, asked me to chair a committee of faculty who would decide about how the undergraduate program would run. Well, Diane was, having had children and various other things, was coming along, let us put it that way, on her PhD thesis.
12 years in.
12 years in, but making progress. But at the same time, it was absolutely clear she was a spectacular teacher. There's no other way to put it, just absolutely spectacular. So after debating for some time and trying to concoct different methods to continue the undergraduate program, it was running very well. It was a nice undergraduate program. We were quite happy with it. This committee decided that Diane would be the one to run the program, with, of course, the stipulation that she finish her PhD within the next 50 years. Or should I say 1 or 2, but
4.
4. But in any case, it was decided that a senior faculty member would have to run the undergraduate program as the director of undergraduate studies to give it coherence and the right kind of picture available on campus for whether we meant to pay attention to undergraduate studies or not. So, of course, the beloved faculty told me that, Paul, you're just the one to run it, and how could I not run it, and so forth and so on. So I told them in 1986 that I would do it for exactly 3 years to get the new program off the ground, but that was it. 1989, I was through. And here I am in 2010, going on 2011, and I'm still the director of undergraduate studies. Am I sorry? No. We have a damn good undergraduate program, and we've worked on it, Diane and I, for many years together, and then John Bowler has joined us. The big change has been in the size of the undergraduate program. There was a stipulation made to Hugo Sonnensheim when he became president of the university that the undergraduate program should grow from wherever it was at the time, high 2000s, to at least 4,500 in order to provide more income to the university in terms of undergraduate tuition and simply have a more thriving university, more on a level of those universities that we thought we were equivalent to. Well, after Hugo became president, he started to expand the undergraduate program, and we went from about 2,800 through 3,800 like there was no tomorrow, and we've gone through 4,800, and we're up around 5,000 is the size of the college now, and I claim we're headed for 6,000. But of course, the university doesn't want to admit it because we still pretend to be a small college. But what we did get was a larger enrollment in mathematics, and we structured a major in such a way that it was a friendly major. Not friendly in terms of content. We've maintained the content has always been tough in mathematics. Nobody would say to you mathematics is a soft major. But the tail that wags the dog in the undergraduate program at Chicago is the economics major. We're famous for economics faculty. You can't get a tenured job unless you have won a Nobel Prize, never mind done good work. And of course they claim that they have thousands of Nobel Prize winners hidden everywhere under the rug. But in any case, there I am, they are the most popular undergraduate major, by far. And in a cooperative venture with economics, we decided to establish a joint degree in mathematics. What came first, would you say, Di, in terms of this relationship with economics?
Well, I think we were doing a good job teaching the economics courses, the major course in math that the economics folks needed, and we talked with them about ramping that up a little bit. And for their best students, they have too many majors. They would like to give us some of their majors, and so for their best majors, they wanted them to have more serious mathematics. And we, I think, simultaneously developed the math and econ program and made our analysis sequence more accessible to a number of students over the years. I mean, we've created our sort of bridge course 199, but we've also made analysis something that's accessible to a lot of people. We have a lot of students taking analysis for a school our size.
So I think that our relationship with econ, this is a university that has no engineering school, so the math department does not have a service load required by engineers, and we don't have a service load required by education. But we do have a service load that involves the economics majors, and we provide a multivariable calculus and a linear algebra course, 1/4 apiece every year. And what's the registration?
Oh, it's hundreds.
But at the same time, we have drawn a lot of students into mathematics because they like the fact that we have a tough major, and they like the fact that we open up a variety of areas after they graduate. Areas such as law school, graduate school in the sciences, graduate school in economics, go downtown and go to work for a financial agency. Teaching itself, a lot of our graduates go into teaching. But the sort of stunning figure is we have about 95 to 100 math majors per year, which if you look at the national figures at most of the prestige universities, the number of math majors or the percentage of math majors has decreased significantly over the past 15 or 20 years. And what are the graduating class do we have now? 8%?
8%, right.
We now have 8% of the graduating class are math majors.
And we're the fourth, if you list the majors by numbers of students, we're the fourth biggest.
Yeah, we're well, graduating from the, of course, economics is first, I said that. And then, who's second?
Biology.
Oh, biology, but they're kind of a fake because that's the division of biological sciences. Mm-hmm. They take all the biology courses, and you can't major in anything but biology, even though you specialize in something. And so they claim second, and I'm not so sure about history is third.
Political science.
Political science is third, and then math is fourth. We like our math majors and we treat them well, and we provide them with a variety of honors sequences and a variety of applicable courses. And most of our first and second year courses, our first year courses at least, are taught by graduate students, except for honors calculus, which, for example, Diane is teaching this year. John Bowler is teaching an inquiry-based learning of honors calculus this year. And my pride and joy for the past 45 years has been honors analysis. And the only name I have for it is Kick-Ass Mathematics. And I wanted to publish a book by that name, and the only person who would publish it was Mike Spivak, when he had his publishing enterprise in publisher Parrish. And so anyway, it is going to be published by the American Math Society, hopefully within the next 5 or 6 years, the book related to that course. But the whole idea of the course is to take pyrotechnically endowed freshmen. That's just my own special word. These are people who come out of Ross Math Camp, Promise Boston University Camp, Kelly's Yellow Pig Camp at Amherst, and have done wonderful work in mathematics leading up to a university, and who think that they just know everything. So the idea of the course is to make them understand that they know something, that they can learn more, and that by no means do they know everything. So the idea is you bring in, I have that class right now, there's about 33 did we say? Kids on the registration list, and they're ready to go. It is just a wonderful group of kids, and as freshmen and sophomores, they have not yet become blasé. They have not yet got ruined by extensive thoughts about life. Of course, they are married to their cell phones, but that's a consequence of today's life. And they have to take anything that I give them, and they have to do it, and then they have to come back the next day and ask for more. And out of this have come a whole bunch of really good people. I mentioned Frank Wilczek and Dave Vogan and Bob Oliver before. More lately,
Anna Gilbert.
Anna Gilbert at Michigan, and
Sue Tolman.
Who?
Sue
Tolman
Tolman
at Urbana, and Tom Scanlon at Berkeley. These are people that came out of that program about 15, 20 years ago and now have tenure in major universities. The idea of the course is to produce mathematicians. If other people want to take it and learn how to do mathematics at that pace, that's great. I delight in it. But no quarter is given and no quarter is expected. So this is part of our undergraduate program. But beyond that, we offer 2 honors sections of honors algebra, which is a Dummett and Foote-based course. And then we have a sequence at the senior level. We have a senior level algebra sequence, representations of finite groups and commutative algebra, and algebraic number theory, algebraic curves, complex analysis, ordinary differential equations, functional analysis, calculus on manifolds. And we have this whole group of undergraduates just go along and take it. Now I should also mention, as part of this undergraduate sequence, we have mid-level courses in number theory and algebra. So we adopt number theory at every level, from the 6th graders in the Young Scholars Program to the people in the Urban Teacher Education Program preparing for elementary schools, up to freshman course, which is our version of Math for Poets. Math for Poets at Chicago consists of a serious quarter of number theory and a serious quarter of geometry, ending up with symmetry groups and their properties and things of that nature. And then the mid-level number theory and algebra, which we offer to undergraduates, especially those who are heading for teaching careers and things like that. So would you include anything else at this point? I think
it's good.
The idea is that we get these kids early, and if they're interested in mathematics, we'll try to provide a source for them to get a top-level mathematics degree that corresponds to their desire for learning, as long as they have a desire for learning.
I think one of the things that you communicate, when we have our teaching meetings at the beginning of the year with all of the graduate students and the new faculty, I think the communication of the fact that we are a nurturing department and we take our teaching seriously, and that you do that as sort of a leadership thing, makes a big difference. And it communicates the right message, and it gets the job done here in our department.
The bottom line is a phrase that I got from John Wooden, the famous basketball coach, who said, "Never confuse activity with achievement." And that's the goal that we set for ourselves and the goal that we set for our students. Just because you stayed up till 3 o'clock trying the homework doesn't mean you achieved anything, unless you really did try to do it the way we suggest. Doesn't mean you were listening to your iPod or turn on the TV at 1 a.m. to catch the news. Not allowed. It's all serious. The famous University of Chicago T-shirt, of course, says on the front, any place else it would have been an A. So we try to adhere to that. When kids come in here with their parents and talk to me about mathematics, I say, kid, do you want to work or do you want to go to Miami-Dade Junior College? Because if you don't want to work, go there.
Does all the faculty teach in the undergraduate program?
I would say almost all. Not enough to my taste, Hugo, but people like, for example, when Drinfeld and Bellinson arrived, they say, oh, they're at the Institute for Advanced Study, they don't have to teach. Well, first of all, they haven't taught freshman calculus, although Drinfeld has volunteered to do so. And I'm not leaning towards it at the moment, but because he runs a magnificent seminar with Bellinson. But Bellinson, for example, gave a reading course last year or 2 years ago to a bunch of undergraduates, and he really gave them a special treatment in Sayre's local fields and things. Some of our top undergraduates are at that level. So, so those are our farthest reaching senior faculty, and most of the senior faculty kick in on a regular basis. I mean, this year, Farb is teaching undergraduate representation theory. Is Nori teaching algebra? Algebra. Alperin's teaching algebra. Weinberger is teaching
Number theory, inquiry-based learning.
Inquiry-based learning, number theory. Every year, a bunch of them pitch in, and so it's not a extreme separation. And look, I mean, the thing that's interesting about getting the senior faculty involved is a lot of our students go to graduate school in mathematics. And when they come and talk to me for advice about how to get into graduate school, I said the first thing is get A's, and the second thing is get some high-level recommendations. And so even though they come to me and they say, well, I had graduate student XYZ and honors freshman calculus, I say that's not going to be a letter of recommendation, that's a fine grade. And so the senior faculty, we try to get the students involved with the senior faculty enough so that they can get the letters they need for graduate study. We also have good collaboration with people in computer science like Latsi Babai, who gives a fabulous combinatorics course and works with the students on research projects and writes good letters of recommendation. And in statistics, we work with people like Mike Wisher and Mike Stein and Steve Stigler. So we have people who take courses in those areas and get letters of recommendation from the senior people there. So the undergraduate program is rolling along, and we maintain a solid front in the basis of the desire of the university to convert everything to computer-based activity and data collection independent of the value. So we are in the Paleolithic age as far as the university is concerned, but there's three of us who hold the wall up, and the senior faculty, the chairs, Peter Constantine is now chair, and he supports us wonderfully in terms of running the undergraduate program and what we need and the encouragement we require. So we're pretty happy with it. As they say, we're tops, baby.
A couple of times in this conversation you mentioned that you're still doing mathematics, and so I wanted to ask you what you're working on these days, and do you have students, and where you see the field of analysis on p-adic groups moving?
Well, that's a good question because the last PhD student I had was about 5 years ago. A kid named Lauren Spice, who's now at TCU in Texas. Lauren was a really sharp student, and I've had a number of good students. So it's interesting the development of my students. Early on, during the 70s, I had a bunch, and during the 80s, well, I had Alan Moy, who got tenure at Michigan, and Fiona Murnahan, who's at Toronto. But the production wasn't large. And then through the 90s, I had a group of really good students, one of whom ended up working with Phil Kutzko, but Alan Roach, he's a really good one, and Jeff Adler, and Steve DeBacher, who's at Michigan, and Lauren Spice, who is now, as I said, at TCU. And he was the last one I had. I decided as I approached 75 that I didn't have a long enough time. I expect to live 15, 20 more years. I mean, I'm shooting for 100, and I expect to teach till I'm 95. But at any rate, I thought Lauren was an extremely good student in the last one. He worked on the character theory of reductive p-adic groups, and he and another student, Jeff Adler, have written what I would call the currently definitive paper on the character theory of reductive p-adic groups. But DeBacher and Mark Reeder at Boston College have also written a paper that involves the character theory of a certain class of representations of p-adic groups, so that the activity continues, but it isn't so strong as other things that are going on, such as affinity to the Langlands program. I myself have thought about it. I wrote a couple of papers in the early 90s the early thousands. What do we call that decade? The aughts.
The
aughts. Huh?
The aughts or the aughts?
The aughts, yeah. They're gone anyway. The aughts are gone, and we're in the teens. In the aughts, I wrote 2 or 3 papers of an expository nature, just summarizing previous material. And then a couple of years ago, I got an invitation from Vogan to give a colloquium at MIT. And then I decided that, hey, maybe I'll unwrap the gloves and see if they still work. Very painful, I must say. When you're 75 and you start to think about things you haven't thought about for a while, it's just sort of like peeling rust off an old engine, you know. But anyway, I've now had some really good ideas, I think. Becky Herb and I have just written an expository paper about the history and current development of the Plancherel formula and the Plancherel theorem and the Fourier transform of orbital integrals. I'm about to finish that up. And I must say, I, with 3 of my students, have finally written down the careful computations of the work I did with Schleicher back in the 60s. We had a proceedings of the National Academy, announcement about the characters for SL2 p-adic, and we depended on that to do a whole variety of other things. And people have berated me endlessly over the years that they weren't published. Well, I decided it's time. What the hell, you should wait 40 or 50 years to see if things are right, and then you can publish them.
Has the style of the subject changed much in these 30 years, or what this work consistent?
Well, it depends. Look, there's 2 things about style. There's this point is, where is the focus of the subject at the moment? The construction that I even mentioned earlier in this discussion, when Schleicher and I got our hands on SL2 p-adic in the mid-60s, the problems were compute the characters, derive the Plancherel formula, and find the Fourier transform of orbital integrals. Now, computing the characters, well, first of all, it was the construction of the representations, and that's moved ahead. I would say Roger Howe was really the big promoter of how to construct supercuspidal representations, and then that was for so-called tame case, where the characteristic of the underlying field was related in a proper way to the rank of the group. But then came along Phil Kutzko, who he and Bushnell did some marvelous work on construction of supracuspidal representations. That went through the mid-'80s, and they wrote a wonderful book for the Princeton Annals Studies. And then came J.K. Yu and Julie Kim. Julie Kim, Roger House student, yeah. No, she's fabulous. And she and J.K. Yu, they didn't work together, but they have, but they both discovered further construction. So the construction of the representations has gone ahead. The point is that in the case of p-adic groups, the obstructions to the construction are much more severe than they were in the real case. Harishchandra painted a beautiful picture of the character theory. As a matter of fact, Harishchandra didn't even do the construction of the discrete series. He did some, like the holomorphic discrete series. I think you had a tangle with them at one point. But Wilfrid Schmid was the one who came along and finally saw that Langland's idea about cohomology was the route to constructing the discrete series. So Schmid did that, and then he and Atiyah did it. And in p-adic groups, the approach has been slightly contrary to that. Namely, people worry about constructing the representations and are still concerned with that. But it's like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube that's already empty. It's very hard to get a general theory. It's moving along. And then came, on top of that, the so-called Plancherel formula, but it didn't move in the direction that Harishchandra had intended for real groups, simply because the knowledge of the characters of the discrete series was very limited, and there still is not much knowledge of those characters. So that Harishchandra published a paper called the Plancherel formula for reductive p-adic groups, but it really doesn't involve the characters of the discrete series in any serious way at all, simply because we don't know enough about them. There has also been activity focused around what I call Langland's predictoriality. This is written on the board. Yeah, Langland's predictoriality means that Bob Langlands has had a sensational view of the interaction of representation theory and number theory and automorphic forms, and has predicted that a number of things are true, and people have pursued that with a venom. On the other hand, at the same time, the basic harmonic analysis and representation theory and character theory has not been so actively pursued, but there's still a lot of work there. So with this paper that Becky Herb and I are just completing, in fact, we point out where the problems lie and the fact that there is still a lot of harmonic analysis still to be done. Langlands has this program called Functoriality, and there are all sorts of aspects to that, and people delight in proving that different parts of it are true. But the simple fact is that the representation theory and harmonic analysis, there's a lot to be done.
Does it all play into the Langlands program?
Well, look, this mathematician who's just come here, Nho, the Vietnamese guy who just won the Fields Medal, he has proved the fundamental lemma. And what is the fundamental lemma? It's about transfer of orbital integrals. And over the years, that's been approached. Langlands and Kjellstad first talked about this back, I believe, in the 70s, certainly the 80s. And Nho has proved that orbital integrals of characteristic functions of certain maximal compact subgroups transfer via this process. In other words, one matches up with the other. But the idea is that this whole program could be enhanced by looking at characters and the Fourier transform of orbital integrals, and this is the point of view that Becky and I are trying to put forward in our upcoming paper. And Arthur knows that. I mean, But this, since it's just one piece of this overall Langlands program, perhaps it doesn't receive the amount of attention it should as local harmonic analysis. So we'll see what comes out of it. I'm still working on it. Becky and I have some good ideas.
And when you mentioned Arthur, you meant Jim Arthur.
Jim Arthur.
Jim
yeah,
Arthur
yeah.
is he working in these?
Well,
same
Jim
areas?
Arthur has really got himself devoted to the Langlands program and the trace formula. And look, he's the prime mover in all of that stuff. He's just a brilliant guy. And he's now writing a book for the American Math Society Colloquium Series, which explains a lot about functoriality and things like that. But he doesn't work on local harmonic analysis much. He did write a couple of papers in the mid-90s that Becky Herb followed up on, and we're trying to analyze those about irreducible components of reducible principal series and how linear combinations of those make certain invariant distributions on elliptic tori and p-adic groups. And the fact of the matter is that this is still only really known for SL2. There are some results along that line, and there's plenty of room to move it. So we'll see what comes out.
It sounds to me like you got the rust off of those tools.
Oh, I did. No, there's no question. I mean, look, I've been writing books and doing lots of stuff. It's just this particular aspect of the subject that I have been talking with people about, but not try to produce any results. And of course, it's rather unseemly to try to do mathematics at the age of 77. For goodness sakes, why don't you shut up and sit down? But I'm too interested, so I'm going to stay with it and see what happens.
What is the inner force that produces this energy that you have available to you both in education and in mathematics and
basketball.
And basketball.
Yeah, thank you. The people ask me that, and my only answer is, what else would I do? I get up in the morning. I love what I'm doing. There's no mistake about that. There are down times. Of course, my personality is such that I'm not allowed to be down because people depend on me to be upscale, moving along all the time, energetic, and I love it. What else? I mean, I can't think of existing any other way than simply getting up to do things. And I have a variety of interests. That's why I'm so lucky. I have my work with the undergraduate program and Diane. I don't work with the graduate program so much anymore, but I always had these bunch of graduate students who were terrific and always taught me a lot of stuff. Then I have all this outside work, and if I don't like the teachers, then I can go work with the young scholars. And I'm writing books now. I decided I hadn't written a book until the year 2000 or so, and I finally decided maybe it's time to write some of this stuff down. And I must tell you, my first-class collaborator is my wife, Judy. You know, she retired from Northwestern because she wanted to do something else, and we started right away. We wrote a book called Trimathlon, which was exercises for kids, and then we wrote a really nice book called Roots to Research, which begins with sort of high school level mathematics for bright kids and carries a problem all the way through to current edges of research. And we just had a marvelous time doing it together, and it's turned out that she loves doing it. We wrote another book, which is going to be published in the MSRI education series. That's all done. We're preparing the manuscript for publication. And then I started to write up my materials, which I had been preparing for 45 years. And I wrote a book called Tools of the Trade. And I'm finishing my fundamentals of mathematical analysis now. And there's a book with Ken on representation theory in the background. Nothing going to stop me. Look, it's a technique. Everybody comes off the walls these days and say, I know how to do this, I know how to do that, we have to reform this, we have to reform that. We have to study methods of teaching mathematics. We have to study the audiences who take it. We have to study what the outcomes are. There's only one invariant in the whole thing, and that is quality mathematics. How you deliver it, what you deliver, how much of it you deliver, how you deliver it, that's all up for experimentation. I've pointed out to you that the greatest luck I've had, I should say, is the ability to teach different varieties of students of mathematics. I've had the graduate students here at Chicago. You couldn't ask for a better audience. And they don't, you know what graduate students want? Tell them the facts. They don't like stories. They don't like to get up and talk to each other in the middle of class. Just tell us the facts. We'll go home and work on it. So what do? You work their butt off. Undergraduates, the honors students, they're a great group, but they love to go home and work on things together, but they also like to hear stories in class and different types of problems. Teachers, they want things that'll help them in the classroom. They resent the fact that you make them work hard, but some of them will work hard and others won't. So the Moore method is one technique that we have used, and it's been very successful in some of its aspects. Whether you can employ it totally in all of undergraduate education, I don't think so. I think that it has its benefits and it has its drawbacks. The drawback is that you don't cover as much ground. The benefits, of course, to the students is that you gain great confidence in your ability to talk about mathematics and to stand up and deliver it to others. See, what teachers don't realize is teaching is very, very hard. And I don't think mathematicians have enough appreciation of this. First of all, you have to understand it. That mathematicians agree to. Secondly, you have to be able to do it. And then thirdly, which is a really hard part, you have to be able to communicate it to other people. And that takes an enormous amount of study and sort of feeling for audiences and things like that. I think about that incessantly all the time. How do I treat this audience to make them appreciate what I'm trying to accomplish without wavering on the quality of the content? And that's the big battle in mathematics education.
There are legends about the outrageous Paul Sally, and I wanted to talk to you about that and to ask you if that's just part of your nature or if that's a strategy for getting...
I'm terribly sorry, but there's nothing outrageous about me. I just do the things that are necessary to accomplish what I want to accomplish.
Well, to begin with, here's a prop.
Where is it?
Here.
What is it?
It's the Marine hat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my students bought this for me. Yeah, they I think they were trying to project that I had a certain way of conducting class. Let me put this on here. There we go. All right. Shall I put on the act? Here we go. Well, if you don't like that, let's just go over to Mamby-Pamby land where people will treat us right, won't they? Well, the idea is, of course, that students somehow get the idea that you're supposed to coddle them. I've had that ever since I taught it, except I must say my first teaching job, I'm going to take this off. Thank you. I'll salute. There we go.
Oh, you're going to get a reference.
There we go. There we go. Okay. My first teaching job at Boston College High School full-time, they were properly disciplined. I had gone there myself, and they used to have Jesuits that stood around with broom handles and whacked kids on the back of their thighs when they didn't behave properly. But somehow people, it's called adolescent entitlement, which somehow carries over into adulthood quite often. That is, kids think they have something coming. and I have the proper attitude. That is, you have a warm bed at night, kid? You getting 3 squares a day? Get down on your knees and thank God. Some kids don't quite take that attitude. So my class is a place where I encourage learning. It's all about learning, but that is all it's about. It's all about mathematics. I don't consider this a socializing discipline. I consider it a place where kids come to learn, and they pay plenty of money, or their parents pay plenty of money to come here or wherever else I've taught. I taught at Brandeis, taught at Washington University, taught at Boston College, I taught in high school, and every place I've gone, the idea is proper behavior is the name of the game. So there are certain stories that are spread, like I don't like cell phones in the class. I have a way to handle that. If a cell phone goes off in class, I put it on the floor in the front of the classroom, and every student in the class comes up and stomps on it with each foot separately, and then I throw it out the window. Have I done that? Yes, I have. And I will do it again when necessary, because I don't like cell phones in my class. On the other hand, there is a great story about Jack Milner and his son Tom. His son Tom Milner Tom turned out to be a great student. He's going off to Vancouver, I think, next year to graduate school. But this is Jack and Deuce McDuff, their son. And Tom came, and he was pretty smart. But then I asked, Thanksgiving was approaching, and I didn't recognize, Milner didn't click with me, so I didn't realize he was Jack's son. And so I'm going to ask it this coming week or the week after. I said, does anybody think they're going home for Thanksgiving before my Wednesday class? Because I have a class at Wednesday at 10:30. And if they raise their hand, I say, no, you're not. And so to make an example of Tom Milner, he claims this didn't happen, but I believe it did. He said he was going home to Long Island. I should have clicked right there that it was Stony Brook, but it didn't. He said, going home to Long Island. And I said, what time is your plane, Tom? And he said, 12:30. I won't be able to make class. So I said, has anybody got a cell phone? And a girl over on the left had one, so I grabbed her cell phone, dial 1-800-I-FLY-SWA. I say, what other planes do you have on Wednesday? And we changed his reservation right in the class. So he went home on the late plane.
And he claims that never
happened. That's all right. Things fade from people's minds, but that's the approach I take, is that the class is sacrosanct. And people shouldn't come late. Now, of course, I was a big screw-off when I was a kid, but nonetheless, the nuns made me toe the line, and so did the Jesuits. And heaven's sake, when I went to high school, every day in high school, I wore pants. I didn't wear jeans. Pants, shoes, shirt, tie, and jacket. That was the rule of the day. Every day I went to high school. And it was accepted, and it was fine. And so the idea that somehow people in your class have rights beyond the opportunity to listen to your spreading of the mathematics discipline just escapes me, why they think that.
As someone who feels the same way as you do, but see my students deserting me in droves when I try to get them to toe the line, I'm curious about how it works in your case. You told us already that the undergraduate population in mathematics has been increasing.
Yeah. And they like this. Now, this honors course, now the point is, what people often don't realize is that you teach different ways to different populations. Heaven's sakes, if I taught the middle grade teachers the way I teach my undergraduate honors students, they'd all be crying.
Yeah.
So So you still teach them the same kind of mathematics. You still teach them top level mathematics, and you still tell them how beautiful this all is, but you're not as harsh on them. And however, they're subject to the same cell phone rule, except I'm a little more lax with the teachers because they come here and their kids are at home taking care of themselves, and There's an interesting sociology goes with it, but the idea is you're dishing out the best stuff that anybody can ever offer, and if they're not buying it, then too bad, go home. And I even had this experience. I taught once at the juvenile detention center in Chicago, and very interesting. Kids about 14, 15. One kid had burned down his house and killed his family. Another kid had shot a couple of others. And they're very, streetwise, tough guys. But they loved mathematics. I mean, they just loved it. And how did I convince them? I said, who's the best basketball player in the world? Well, of course, Michael Jordan's name came up, but Penny Hardaway and a couple of others. And I said, you know what? You're going to get the same kind of mathematics from me that you would get basketball from them. And they bought in.
Oh, that's good.
And well, we had a great time. We had a wonderful time, and we did. I love the problem about giving a penny the first day and doubling it every day, and where are you at the end of a month? And they really worked that out for me, and they did a lot of algebraic ideas. Good group of kids. But again, what's the idea? You got to present them with kinds of problems and show them that there's a way to do it, but make it tough. If it's not tough, don't do it. That's it. So there's a way to attract attention. Then you have to have a few good jokes too, and tell them stories about mathematics. It so depends on the audience, that how you treat them and what they want to hear. But always, always, always the quality of the mathematics has to be high, no matter where you're teaching and what you're teaching. And I've sort of adhered to that over the years. Studying and thinking about teaching and thinking about all that stuff like preparation and how you should arrange things, it's a marvelous source of ideas about communicating mathematics. And I think the more different types of audiences you address, the more you come to understand that there is great variety in the methods of teaching, and that's because of the difference in the audience and the purpose of the course. I used to work on furniture trucks in Boston and deliver furniture with some old guys, and I could tell you some of their stories. If we have, is the launch button on? Billy Whalen, boy, they were good guys. They were great. They were fantastic. I should tell you one story about them that's interesting that I use with students, my own students, is that as I grew up, people encouraged me not to accept what I could have accepted. Because when I was a freshman in college, I had a job at Gilchrist Department Store. Did you ever know Gilchrist?
Oh, yeah, I remember
Was it
that.
there?
Yeah,
down at
yeah.
Four Corners down there?
It's all gone, yeah.
Yeah, it's all gone now. But
Chestnut Hill, too.
I sold furniture, I sold books, but most of all, I loaded furniture trucks and delivered furniture. And I was working one summer with good old Andy Mogan. Andy Mogan was a famous guy. We drove a Diamond T, and that's a truck. And I said to Andy, this is fantastic, this job. Because we used to go out about 8 o'clock in the morning and deliver refrigerators to East Boston and couches over to Dorchester. And about 2 o'clock, we'd go down to Franklin Park and lie on the line and draw about 3 hours, lie on the lawn and draw about 3 hours overtime. So I was making $1. This is good. And I said, man, this is for me. I could do this. And he said, Paul, he said, you're actually right. That's just the way I felt when I was young. He said, and you'll do it and you'll love it. And then after about 10 or 15 years, you'll realize this is what I chose for life. And you'll only be 35 or 40. So you're stuck. So I took that to heart. And you got to understand it. I mean, I was good in academics, but that was not my prime goal. And then when I got teaching at Boston College High School, I had my old teacher, and I must say then, the fourth year advanced course in mathematics was solid geometry, which was a spectacular experience. It's where I got my spatial visualization, and this guy Andy Pharisee taught it, or John Pharisee, John Pharisee, and I was teaching, and I loved that high school teaching. I would teach from 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12, 12 to 1. Then I would go to lunch in the Jesuit lunchroom, where I would line up 5 plates of spaghetti, 10 milk, 4 ice creams. And the Jesuits used to actually come down to watch me eat lunch because I would just inhale the food, just rum, rum, rum. And then I would go back and teach from 1:20 to 2:20. That was my day. And every night I would go home with 200, 250 homeworks and check them to see if the kids wrote any insults in the home. I never graded them, of course, but I checked to see if the kids wrote any insults in them, and they did. So then I would reprimand them the next day, which meant they thought I was looking at the homework. As a matter of fact, one kid once gave me a cigar. He thought I was a good guy. Tommy Masters. I remember the kid to this day. And I didn't smoke cigars at the time, so I gave it to my dad. And he smoked it 2 days later and exploded in his face. My dad said, "Who the hell gave you that cigar?" You know, and I went into Tommy Masters. I said, "I gave that to my dad." Tommy said, "Oh, Jesus." Anyway, but I talked to Pharisee, John Pharisee. He was a good teacher. I mean, solid geometry was a much better course than AP Calculus is now. AP Calculus is just nonsense because they don't teach the kids about analysis. They teach them about formulas. And I still use that in my teaching to the young scholars and to teachers and everybody else. But in any case, I said to John Pharisee, "John, this is a job for me. I'm going to be a high school teacher for life. I love it. I love every day. I get up, I get great lunches and so forth." Incidentally, I was making $2,400 a year on my first high school teaching job. And the first thing I did was go out and buy a 1954 baby blue white top Chrysler convertible for $1,500, therefore blowing my year's salary. And anyway, John Pharisee told me, he said, "Paul," he said, "same thing Andy Moga did." He said, "You'll just love this job for the first 10 or 15 years. And then you'll be 35 or 40 and you're stuck for life." He said, "Some people do that, but that's not for you. You need to do more." So I took his word, and that was when I got ready to go to Brandeis, and it worked out just fine. People kept telling me, "Keep pumping ahead," and every time I tried to pump ahead, I hit a good patch of luck. I told you, there's nothing like being a lucky Irishman. There's absolutely nothing in the world like that.
But there's a saying that the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yeah, well,
and
of
there was
course,
a little
there's
bit
that
of,
to it. Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit of
no,
hard
no.
work in there.
No, I knew how to bust ass, yeah. But I had to, I mean, you asked that, but I had to pick the right targets. And when I got to the Institute, when I got to Wash U, actually, I picked the right target. Go do this stuff. And Ray was the one that supported me through that. I got to tell you, he was fantastic. Always encouraging, always working with me, always. This is the other thing that came from Ray too, was I was working on my thesis, and there were, remember Lajos Pukansky?
Yeah.
I was following his work, and I got to a point where I had done everything that Pukansky did, but I had done it in a different manner. And I said to Ray, "Well, that should be good enough. That gets the Plancherel formula." He said, "Why don't you get the rest?" That was perfect. It was just perfect, because that was a lesson of a lifetime. Don't stop. Keep pumping. Even when you think you have your thesis done, don't stop. And I did, and it worked out very nicely. And so anyway, the idea is, if you try to tell yourself to stop, find somebody who'll tell you not to stop and listen to them. That's it.
Well, I tried stopping, but it didn't work for me.
What?
Well, I retired,
Yeah, I know.
and then
It doesn't work.
no.
Not when you got a personality like that, you know? I mean, what the hell do you do if you don't have a job to go to in the morning? I mean, that's one, and this is in my whole family. I should say that, with my brother and my sisters. Everybody liked to work. I had my first paper route when I was 7 years old. I delivered 33 Boston Heralds to Congreve, Fletcher, Farquhar, and Hewlett Streets in Rosendale. I still remember the name of the streets, right out by Fallon Field. I got up 5 o'clock, made myself a little wooden wagon, and wheeled the 33 papers out. So So my family is working as a habit, that's all. And if you happen to have a good job, it's even better.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.